No problem.
Okay, you're good to go.
All right, and I'm going to press the got it there. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eleanor O'Rangers, and I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society, celebrating our 11th year, believe it or not. And we primarily collect oral histories of people who were involved in Cold War related activities in the greater Southeastern Pennsylvania area. Yeah, we've been ongoing since 2010. A little bit more about me. I was actually born in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and lived in Warminster from 1973 to 1978, actually right down the street from the Naval Air Development Center. If any of you remember the naval base that was right there on Street Road and Jacksonville Road. I did move away for many years to Maryland, but as an adult, I returned to the area because I was working for the pharmaceutical industry and also consulting for the industry. I currently reside in Northern Maryland, and if the pandemic hadn't put a monkey wrench in my plans, I was hoping to move back to the area. So hopefully that will be in my future at some point. But you know, even as a kid, I was always fascinated by local history and also what went on at the Naval Air Development Center in particular, because it was, you know, we'd pass it all the time when we were out and about, you know, running errands and so forth. So that's a little bit about how I got interested in eventually collecting oral histories around the Cold War. And a lot of the people that we've interviewed over the years had worked at the Naval Air Development Center. Excuse me, I have allergies that are bothering me, so I apologize for coughing. If any of you are interested in staying in touch with our organization, you can send an email to the email that you see on the screen. We also have a website, coldwarhistory.org, that has a lot of information on there that may be of interest. We also have an events page, so you can get information about upcoming events that we also host, including webinars that are done monthly. In the past, pre-pandemic, we did have several monthly lectures live at the old Johnsville Centrifuge, known as the Fuge locally now. We're hoping in 2022 to possibly get back to doing some limited programming, but since 2020, we picked up doing programming by webinar, similar to what you see this evening. So that's worked very well for us, and we do plan on continuing our webinar programming in 2022. So if you get on our email distribution list or keep up with our website, you're going to start seeing some of that programming fairly soon. I have some pretty cool stuff planned for 22. Also, we are a 501c3 organization, so we certainly do rely on the generous donations of those that do, you know, choose to support us. And, you know, what does that stuff support? I know sometimes it's always thought of as like a black box. If I send money, you know, where does it go? And I can tell you that any proceeds go strictly to the organization itself. I mean, I do not draw a salary, you know, any other volunteers obviously do not. It's primarily to support guest lecturers from out of town for some of their travel expenses, a modest honoraria, if possible. We've also had a long-term bucket list project to try to get transcriptions of our interviews so we can put that all together along with a digital archive. We also occasionally have done displays over the years. I know we had a display in the display cabinet of the Warminster Library a couple of years ago, along with the Warminster Historical Society. And also we do, as I mentioned, have a website, and there's some marginal upkeep that's done with the website that, you know, any of these proceeds go to. So without further ado, let's kind of get into it. So, you know, as I've mentioned a couple of times this evening already, NEDC, or the Naval Air Development Center, was a Navy base that was located essentially at Street Road and Jacksonville Road. It was originally an aeronautical corporation known as Brewster that operated up until the early 1940s. Well, I put in quotation marks because it was really, it was grossly mismanaged. and was eventually taken over by the US government when there was a lack of fulfillment of several airplane contracts for World War II. And with the government having this plot of land sitting here in, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, eventually the Navy took over the site and created what I would characterize as a research and development center that operated for about 50 years. So starting 1944 or so is when it was officially commissioned, and then it was closed in 1996. But during that approximately 50-year time frame, a number of things were innovated here and accomplished. And what I'm going to plan on sharing this evening are, I think, some lesser known but very important contributions that some individuals from NEDC made, to the greater historical record. And I have a couple other interesting anecdotes to relay as well. So the title of our presentation this evening, and this is a new presentation that I'm giving this evening, so bear with me because it is a new one, but we've decided to call it Hidden Figures of the Cold War in Bucks County. And, I think many of you this evening are probably familiar with the movie Hidden Figures that came out in 2016 that told the story of 3 African-American women who worked as mathematicians at NASA, actually NASA Langley in Southern Virginia. It was called Hidden Figures because these women are working behind the scenes. As we know, about our past, women, African Americans, marginalized populations were not necessarily recognized for their contributions. Fortunately, I think the historical record is now being rectified in that regard. But that's where the origin of Hidden Figures came from. I think it was actually a book before it became a movie. But, as you may or may not know, but hopefully you'll walk away appreciating a little bit more this evening after this presentation, Bucks County really has its own, what I would call, hidden figures that served during the Cold War as well at the Naval Air Development Center. And the 3 ladies that you see in this image, we are going to profile this evening. So let's get into it. Again, Hidden Figures of the Cold War, in Bucks County. I don't know what happened to my slide there, in Bucks County. So as you can see in the center of this photograph, 3 individuals that we're going to profile this evening from left to right are Maria Chianti, Gloria Chisholm in the center, and Alice Stoll. So let's start with Alice. Now, Alice actually passed away in 2014. I believe she was about 90. She was in her early 90s when she passed away. We did have the opportunity to interview her, and you'll see a couple interview clips in this presentation this evening that I thought would be of interest. But let's start out with before Alice achieved all that she did in working at NEDC. Something that I learned actually when I attended her funeral was this little story, which I thought was rather amusing and aggravating at the same time, and I think gives a little bit of insight to the type of individual Alice was. So Alice was from New York, and after she graduated from high school and entered college, she actually had an interest in working for the FBI. So she actually, what you see copy there on the left, is a response to Alice's inquiry to the FBI as to whether she could work as a special agent. And, not to read the entire letter from J. Edgar Hoover, but if I point you to the middle paragraph, this was J. Edgar Hoover's response at the time. For your information, the only positions for female applicants in this bureau are stenographer and typist. Stenographer applicants are required to take a dictation test at the rate of 120 words per minute, and typist applicants must take a typing test at the rate of 45 words per minute. So basically, J. Edgar Hoover gave Alice the brush off. And I think, in learning about this, I just sort of shook my head as to, someone with a lesser constitution may have been completely deflated by this, but as you'll come to appreciate, that certainly wasn't the case. So Alice received her Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry and physics from Hunter College in 1938. And then she worked as a research assistant at Cornell Medical College before she went into the Navy from 1943 to 1946. She returned to Cornell after the war, received a master's degree in physiology and biophysics in 1948. In fact, she was one of the first women to receive a biophysics degree from Cornell at the time. And you can see on the right, couple of pictures, from 1950 and 1953, when she was working in research as well as on faculty in the lower picture. Now, in 1953, she was actually recruited to the Naval Air Development Center. As I briefly mentioned in the introduction, NEDC had started up in about 1944. It was known as the Naval Air Modification Unit. Eventually, for the majority of the time it was operating, it became known as the Naval Air Development Center. But anyway, Alice was recruited there in 1953 because actually it turned out that her boss at Cornell went to work at the University of Pennsylvania and also for the Navy. So basically, I think he recruited the best of his best down to Warminster. And during her time at NADC, she made major contributions to what really became known as a revolutionary approach in the protection of military and civilian personnel against skin burns due to flame contact and thermal radiation. She actually holds several patents, including a patent that we'll show you an image of that shortly. She developed a device that could actually analyze transfer of heat due to flame contact. And this was actually pretty revolutionary and was, no one had ever actually approached the question of trying to quantitate this heat transfer between materials and the skin. The big thing that she got involved with at NADC was a very large multi-year project to figure out how to make better flight suits for pilots. And formerly, fire retardant treatment of fabrics, basically fabrics were sprayed or soaked in a material that could give them some degree of flame retardancy. They were, that was kind of the standard at the time. But she actually demonstrated that really was inferior to utilizing an alternative approach, which would be a filament or later spun into cloth that had inherent fire retardancy properties, so that were retained. So it wasn't like you had to keep soaking the materials over time to maintain their flame retardancy. That material that was developed and tested and evaluated by Alice in conjunction with DuPont Pharmaceuticals later was named Nomex. And I think many people are probably familiar with Nomex because it really I would say it's an ubiquitous material that is used in many, many applications today beyond what it was originally intended for, which was to improve the ability of pilots to get out of if they had a crash in their aircraft, so that they could actually hopefully safely egress from the aircraft without severe burns in the cockpit. Before we get to a little bit more about the story of Nomex, actually in Alice's own words, another little anecdote that I wanted to share with you is that when Alice originally came to NADC, her thermal laboratory was not ready yet. And basically, she was bored. And it turned out that she ended up spending some time just to keep busy at the centrifuge, the Johnsville centrifuge, that was operational at that time. And what's incredible to me is that she ended up reanalyzing data that had already been previously collected at the centrifuge and analyzed, but she decided to take a look at it, essentially to orient herself to the data that had been collected. And she ended up reanalyzing the data in a unique way and publishing a paper in 1956 that basically defined the human tolerance to centrifugal acceleration. And when someone would lose consciousness on average, if you're spun up, on a centrifuge, that data, that article from 1956 is still quoted in the aeronautical literature today. And this was basically a side project for Alice, and her major work with Nomex had not even gotten up and running. So I believe in this. Yeah. What I'm going to play now, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it, is Alice's recounting about this actual paper and how it came to be.
When I went to NDEC, I was in the thermal research area to begin with, but we hadn't yet set up a laboratory at NDEC. I really had nothing to do. So Dr. Beckman, who was the author of the experimental data, he was head of physiology at that time. He told me he had this big bin full of acceleration data, and I thought, it's acceleration lab, I should do something about that. And I asked, would it be all right if I looked at that data and made an analysis or whatever? And he said, oh, that'd be great. So that's what I did. And although the article was published in, I think he published it originally, his analysis of the data in aviation medicine a couple of years before, I took a different view of it. And came up with the article there. And it was just a reanalysis, a different way of looking at the same data. Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe it was simpler than what he had. I don't know, but anyway, it came out to be very useful. And that's about it. No big deal.
No big deal. Pretty amazing. A side project that's still quoted in the literature today. I also wanted to show everyone this picture. I came across this at random when I was preparing this presentation. Actually, a company that's involved with workplace safety had a couple of vignettes on their website of scientists that had done foundational work that they've applied for some of the work that they do in workplace safety. And lo and behold, there's Alice right there, who was profiled in that on that website. Yep. So I also want to acknowledge a couple of other people in Alice's lab once it was up and running. From the left, actually Lambert Monroe, who was a physical science technician, worked side by side with Alice for many years in the laboratory. I don't know much about him. I do know that he does share the patent that Alice had was awarded for the thermal analysis device. So I did want to acknowledge him. You can see in the center Maria Chianta, who I've mentioned, and we'll talk about her coming up and some of her contributions. She was a chemist by training. And then you have Alice over on the right. There was also another gentleman, a mathematician who worked with them by the name of John Weaver. I could not find a picture of John to be able to identify him. And one of the other things that I found interesting, and this is not atypical of some of the researchers that worked at the Naval Air Development Center, in the late 50s, 60s, this was really a time before typical institutional review boards, ethics committees, if you will, were up and running to, scrutinize research protocols, particularly where human subjects were involved. It was not uncommon for researchers to serve as their own guinea pigs for their own experiments. And here's a classic example. This is actually Alice's hand, and you can see on her ring finger clearly a blister. She actually was testing some of this, her thermal theories on her own skin as well. So this was not, again, uncommon that you would see with these researchers. Here's an image of the patent that Alice was awarded, again, for this particular thermal device. Incidentally, we actually have submitted an application for Alice to be recognized by the oh gosh, what is it called? The U.S. Invention Hall of Fame, the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And we're hoping that she will be finally inducted into that organization, but I'm still waiting to hear from that organization. Now, I definitely wanted to also have you hear in Alice's own words, the story of how she worked and her lab worked on developing fire retardant material in conjunction with DuPont Pharmaceuticals. So without further ado, let's talk to Alice again and hear her story.
It was 1957 that we were asked to find a substitute for nylon. And this nylon was used in the flight suits of the aviators. And the trouble with it was that it was flammable. They were in a fire, the suit would melt to the skin. When it pulled the burnt fabric off, the skin came with it. We started looking at many fabrics and subjected them to the flame contacts and the infrared heat and so on. And in the course of this exercise, we learned about a filament that DuPont was working with. It was called HT1, which was high temperature 1. This material was a filament, and it was very thick and totally unsuitable for clothing, but we figured, well, if we work on it, it doesn't melt, which is a big advantage, and DuPont can make it thinner and so on. So for the next 10 years or 15, I forget what, DuPont and our lab cooperated in producing fabric out of this filament. It had to be dyed green and orange because those were the colors that they needed for camouflage and for everyday use in the Navy. And that took years for DuPont to come up with it, but they did. They finally got suitable to make clothing. And then they had to get a name for this new fabric. And so I didn't know this, but companies convene a panel to find a name, and at DuPont they use a 6-letter name. So because it had the no melting quality, they were going to call it No-Mel. And then, of course, one of the criteria is that you have to spell it backwards to make sure it doesn't spell anything. But that's when it spells lemon. So they changed it. That's the truth.
Alice was a delightful person, as you could see from that clip. I just want to walk you through a couple other just fun images of some of the history with Nomex. At NEDC, Alice actually had a fire pit actually developed so that they could do controlled burns at the facility in order to test these different materials on mannequins that were subjected to the flame in this test facility. It was basically enclosed in 3 sides by a big steel fence, and it was set back about 15 feet on each side. And then in the center was a basin that contained water. And then the surface of the pit was divided into this grid that you can see there. And those were the divisions were with aluminum pipes, and there were basically 12 of these squares in this basin that was filled with water. Here's an overhead view so you can see this better. So within each of those squares, there was a fuel nozzle in the floor, and basically jet engine fuel was pumped through those nozzles and would float on the top of the water. And then that way there was a way to have even distribution of the fuel in order to have a controlled burn and basically an equitable burn across the surface area of this flame pit. Here's a picture where you can see that there was this big arm that they could suspend a mannequin that would be dressed in material that would be swung into the fire pit when they would be doing their experiments. You can also see that I have pointed out there that there were these propane igniters around the perimeter of the pit. So, basically they would light the thing on fire, and then they would rotate this crane with the mannequin to conduct their experiment through the flames. Here you can see the two technicians actually loading a mannequin onto that arm in preparation for an experiment. And here you can see that, and they're also behind this basically retaining wall. There were also cameras that were set up as well, in order to record the experiment. Here's another close-up view. You can see of technicians placing a test mannequin, preparing the test mannequin before on the left, and then after, you can see after the mannequin was subjected to flame in the pit. Here's an image of the active flame pit, along with the mannequin on the arm that's swung into that for exposure. And here's some images before and after, front and back, of pilot suit, and before and then after exposure to flame. So that was one big part of Alice's work with the development of Nomex. Now, in addition to that, they also evaluated other types of thermal exposure with materials over time. So in addition to flame exposure, they actually had developed a nuclear detonation heat simulator that you could see pictured here. So they actually tested that type of thermal exposure with materials as well. And they also did other experiments with other types of thermal exposure. Here, I think this was with jet blast. And they actually did an experiment with that as well. And then finally, they also did some work at Camp Pendleton out in San Diego, looking at using baby swine, basically. Swine skin is very similar to human skin. And they actually did some animal experiments out there, again, to evaluate thermal exposure and evaluation of skin damage subsequent to that. So a variety of different types of thermal exposures were evaluated over the years, along with these materials, as part of this larger work on validating the utility of Nomex as a protective fabric for individuals. So there really is quite a legacy that Alice leaves behind. And this is actually in her own words here. These were remarks that were delivered by Alice during a reception in 1998, where she and the late Maria Chianta, who had also gone to Cornell, actually donated an endowed chair to Cornell University. But basically, here what she says is that by 1980, by the time of her retirement, her laboratory completed all the basic research required to create an internally consistent, experimentally verified body of knowledge with respect to pain and burn in human skin produced by all avenues of heat transfer, conduction, convection, radiation, flame contact. And that they had also developed methods for measuring the thickness of the skin temperature, skin damage, and so forth. So again, really quite a legacy, that has left behind. And again, Nomex is an ubiquitous protective material that is used in a variety of applications today, as an insulator, as a fabric for pilots, for race car drivers, astronauts. So really quite a remarkable legacy. And from a lady who, again, pretty much a hidden figure, didn't know much about someone working there at Johnsville on all this work over the years. The next person I'd like to talk about is Gloria Chisholm. Now, Gloria is still living. She was born in 1930, actually in Oklahoma. And she actually attended Howard University, received an undergraduate degree in psychology, and then eventually a PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania in 1960. And she went directly to work at NADC following her doctoral, following receipt of her doctorate. She worked in NADC as an experimental psychologist. She initially managed the life sciences research group and then the vision laboratory, and eventually headed up the environmental physiology research team. So she certainly had worked her way up in prominence at the naval base. She was a recognized, or still is, recognized authority on visual problems associated with the operation of high performance aircraft. Based on that expertise, she served as a consultant to all branches of the U.S. Department of Defense. She also served on a number of NATO committees and other organizations internationally. Similar to all the research that Alice had done, Gloria's actually authored 2 books having to do with visual assessment of pilots, and also a book on laser eye protection for flight personnel. And also of note, she's the first African-American woman to serve as a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Pennsylvania, and she has held multiple other board appointments as well. I mean, the list goes on and on. This is just a very gross summary of Gloria's history. Now, one thing in particular that I found of interest with Gloria's work in the Vision Laboratory at NADC was work that was done on protection against nuclear flash blindness with pilots. So, essentially, well, what is nuclear flash blindness? Well, remember back in the 50s, 60s, we're in the height of the Cold War, and the threat of nuclear annihilation between the US and USSR was certainly front and center. There was certainly a concern with pilots that they could possibly be exposed to extremely high, light flash in the event of that they're flying near a nuclear detonation. The thing is that flash, that immediate flash, can virtually, you can blind the pilot for some time after that, acute illumination, and then eventually they can regain their eyesight. But obviously, if you're flying an aircraft, that's not going to be a good situation to be temporarily blinded. There is also the possibility of irreversible damage, actually burning the retina, depending on exposure to radiation as well. But basically, the big concern was an acute flash of light that would basically blind the pilot, and certainly that was not an optimal situation. So there was a lot of interest in trying to develop protective eyewear to prevent this from happening. This is actually an image of a prototype of a eye protection device that could be attached to a pilot's helmet. And her lab was involved in developing this prototype to protect against flash blindness. Now, what was interesting about how they solved this problem is that there was a sensor, and you can see in the middle of this attachment between the 2 eye fields, that there were flash sensors built into the helmet that would trigger in the event of illumination, and that would trigger the release of black printer's ink between 2 pieces of glass that were basically in the eye fields. So they would basically be flooded with this black ink that was radio opaque, and that's what would immediately protect the pilot's eyes. Now, unfortunately, this was only a prototype and did not become operational, but it was a proof of concept that this could in fact protect pilots from flash blindness. But it was really one use. It's not like you could clean out the printer's ink from those lenses once it was actually activated. And actually also, Gloria does hold 2 other patents for related eyewear solutions for pilots. Now, I thought it might be interesting just to show you kind of what evolved eventually to the current situation for eyewear protection against flash blindness. So what you see in this image here looks a lot like that original prototype that Gloria's lab had actually developed, although this was actually developed through a contract with the Air Force. And this was developed many years ago and are still used today. These are called Plizzit goggles. Now, what's a little bit different and I think more practical with this particular solution is, again, this is like a add-on to the pilot's helmet. But in contrast to Gloria's solution with the visual fields being flooded with radio opaque ink, these lenses, when an electric current was activated with the flash, they would actually change polarization in the lenses and they would go black. So it would be basically like, imagine blinds. And, when you shut your blinds to prevent light from coming in, that's essentially how these would operate. But the lenses could return to reestablish the visual field. So that was an advantage. These were essentially, reusable. So from a cost perspective and practicality perspective, this was ultimately a better operational solution. But I thought it was interesting that I wanted to show you kind of what this evolved to. But again, some of that foundational work about the concept of flash blindness protection was pioneered in Gloria's lab. So the next hidden figure that I also want to profile is Maria Chianta. Now, I actually do not know exactly when she was born, but I do know she passed away in 1995. She received a chemistry degree from Hunter College and actually met Alice Stoll when they were, basically at Hunter and then later working at Cornell. But in contrast to the road that Alice took, Maria's was a little different. She had a degree in physics of radiology from the New York School of Radiography, and then she did work in research at New York Hospital and Sloan Kettering, the Cancer Institute in New York City. She joined the Navy actually at the same time that Alice joined the Navy. They were friends by this time, and they conducted she actually conducted research in bacteriological warfare defense at Camp Detrick, which is now known as Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. And then following the war, she worked in a diagnostics lab in Hawaii. And then in 1953, she ended up coming to NADC, worked in Alice's lab actually, and like Alice, conducted research in thermal and chemical protection of aviation personnel, but also had a role that we're still trying to research in biological protection as well, which certainly caught our eye. So in trying to uncover exactly what Maria was involved in, because some of the work that she was involved in is still, as far as we know, is still not completely declassified. But what we were able to uncover is that is the work that she was more than likely involved in during World War II when she was stationed at Camp Detrick. And that was around research with botulism, with botulinum toxin. That is a toxin that's produced by a microbe called Clostridium botulinum. And, botulism is a serious and can be sometimes deadly disease. And the big deal about botulism is that it can cause paralysis. And it can start with the face and then move down the body. And eventually could cause respiratory arrest. So it certainly is a very serious condition if it's contracted. Fortunately, though, even though today there's no reports that botulism itself has been linked to bioterrorism, that was a very real concern, actually at the end of World War I. And there were what turned out to be erroneous reports that perhaps the Japanese or Germany were toying with trying to leverage botulism as a bioterrorism weapon. So the US, once we got involved in World War II, was very interested in understanding this potential toxin more, and hopefully preventing troops from dying from exposures. So from what we've been able to uncover, Maria was probably involved as a chemist in work on botulinum toxin research at Camp Detrick. And the big deal about the research that was done at Camp Detrick was that they did a lot of refinements in isolating this toxin and purifying it so that they could actually develop, first of all, an antitoxin, which could be used for the troops. In fact, one of the big things that they were aiming for was developing this vaccine or antitoxin to protect the Allied warfighters going into D-Day in 1944. But the other long-term interesting, PS to the story is that a lot of this foundational research that was done at Camp Detrick eventually found its way into research labs in the pharmaceutical industry. Eventually, as we know, as many of you may know, there's a substance that was approved many years ago called Botox. Well, Botox is actually botulinum toxin, and it has been purified into a pharmaceutical that is used for a variety of things, not just wrinkles. We always think of wrinkles, but it has use in migraines, in preventing migraines. It's used in and many other conditions that you can see listed here on the slide. So it's interesting that, again, this lady who sort of was in the shadows as a chemist, and in some respects, maybe working in the shadows of what Alice accomplished, but she herself had likely a very important role in terms of protecting our Allied troops during World War II, but certainly has a legacy of that work that eventually transferred into the pharmaceutical industry. The other piece to the puzzle is that she clearly was recognized as a bacteriological warfare expert. That certainly is profiled in her obituary from 1995. But we also did unearth a photograph of Maria, actually, along with I also like how she's the only woman in this group. But this was actually an example of consultant work that she did with actually with NATO on this nuclear, biological, and chemical coordinating committee. And there were, and she did work with other committees as well. We've not been able to uncover exactly what she did, but she was obviously a consultant for this, and probably based on that work that she had been involved in World War II. So another very interesting lady, and certainly any other information we can uncover to enhance our presentation, we're hoping to do over time. Also, and working at the base, as mentioned, she had worked in the laboratory with Alice. She also did some other work herself, but a lot of her work was done along with Alice, but she was often recognized for her accomplishments with technical paper writing and so forth. These are just two examples of photographs that we've uncovered of both Alice and Maria being recognized for their research at NADC. So those are the three major hidden figures, if you will, that I wanted to profile. And Heather, I don't know how much more time we have, but I do have a few other tidbits to share with the group if there is time.
Yep, we have time.
Okay, great. So these are some other stories that I thought would be fun. This is one of my favorite stories that we've actually heard. And I like to think of this lady, Millie Clicka, who passed away in 2018. She was the captain's secretary at NADC. I certainly like to think that this woman helped to prevent a major Cold War incident, actually, that could have occurred in 1976. So I want to make sure that she's given adequate credit for this. So, so the story goes, one of the technical directors at NADC at the time, by the name of Bill Lyons, and you'll see him in a moment, he recounted a funny story to us that occurred at the base in 1976. And he said I was on my way to lunch and suddenly I get a phone call from the captain's office. And the captain, you could tell he was all nervous. And he says to Bill, Von Beck is on his way and he's bringing some Russians with him. Well, that's a little bit of a problem because at the time, NEDC was the Navy Center for Airborne Sensors for Detection and Identification for both Russian aircraft and submarines. So this was a major center that was right in the midst of Cold War defense for the Allies and the United States. So obviously you don't really want to have the enemy, if you will, getting any peek into behind the curtain on some of this work. And, so that obviously is a problem. So they were concerned about that from a security perspective. And then here they're getting a phone call that one of their scientists working at the base is like, oh, hey, I'm just going to bring a couple of Russians up to have a visit. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, who was this scientist? Well, his name was Harold von Beck. And this guy was an interesting character as well. He was actually an Austrian physician and pilot with the German Luftwaffe in World War II. And after the end of the war, he ended up going to Argentina and worked with the Argentine Air Force. And he was actually really mostly interested in aeronautics and the emerging space, emerging possibility of space flight. And he worked down in Argentina for a number of years, but then in the mid-1950s, he accepted a job with the Glenn L. Martin Company and went to work for the Air Medical Research Laboratory at Holloman Air Force Base out in New Mexico, where he was continuing to do this work, pre-work, if you will, for space flight and his interest in aeronautics in that regard. Later, though, he did become a director of medical research at the Naval Air Development Center, ended up going east to work at NEDC, and again, continued to do his work in aeronautics, and particularly did work on understanding acceleration forces. He did a lot of work at the Johnsville Centrifuge. Now, who did he happen to invite? Well, in 1976, Philadelphia bicentennial, big year for a lot of people wanting to have meetings in Philly. And that year, the Aerospace Medical Association had their annual conference in Philadelphia. And Von Beck meets up with two Russian cosmonauts that had recently returned from a mission to, I believe, a Salyut space station at the time. And, so he happens to meet up with these guys, strikes up a conversation and decides, hey, what a great idea. Let me invite them to get a tour of the centrifuge in Johnsville, because, hey, we're just, 30 miles away from that. So these are the two individuals that he decides to invite up along with his entourage. Now, this is a bit of a longer clip that Bill actually tells, but it is a funny story the way Bill tells it. So let's take a listen to that as well.
Billy Clicka was here to go to work the first that he opened the doors as the Navy. Mm-hmm. And she was there when they closed the doors on the center. And she's still pretty perky and everything, And I did, it was just about lunchtime. And I was getting ready to go to lunch. And all of a sudden, Billy comes running around the corner. And I had the office around the corner from the captain. And she says, come on, Bill, quick, we got a problem. I said, well, what's the matter? What's the matter? So by that time, we were in the captain's office, and I said, what's the matter, Captain? And he says, Von Beck, not Dr. Von Beck. Von Beck just called, and he's bringing the Russians up here. And I said, what? And he says, what do we do? I said,
open the door.
Let's get, I said, I'll call the intelligencer. We'll make us a good public. So I said, and he said, oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. He says, and he was literally shaking.
Oh my God.
Well, here he's a Navy captain, and here come the Russians. And we have a Cold War going on with them. Right? So anyway, Millie, always calm and collected, calls Chief Navy Operations.
Pick up
And
the phone and
Yeah.
call him.
We'll just give him a buzz.
And so she called CNO and they said, well, you can't turn them away. And I said, that's for sure. That would they go
cause
back
it.
to the convention. They were in town, Philadelphia, for an International Space Organization conference, convention. And Philadelphia was full of them. Everybody that had anything wanted to have it in Philadelphia,
Because it's 1976.
Exactly.
Right.
I see the Liberty Bell and
So
Well,
they
it's
had
got
as
crack
much
bell.
right to be there as Von Beck had, from that standpoint. So the man down at CNO, he said, do you have a place where you can take them? And she said, well, I think they're here to see the centrifuge. And he said, can you keep them away from anything classified? And that's perfect. So he said, and just make them feel at home and be polite. We don't want any incidents, So there, and when Von Beck called, I said, are they leaving the city? And he said they'd be here like 20 minutes or something.
Oh, my.
So I said, well, geez. I said, get a plaque, Billy. We have to have something to give them, You can't come in and shake hands and, anything like that without getting a plaque. So we used to have nice on wood and all like that. And, on your visit here or something, I said, and have them send it right up to the office, and the first thing I'll do, I'll take them around, and then I said, Captain, you gotta see them.
You can't shoot them.
No.
exactly.
So I said, Billy, call security and tell them I need passes. And we have no paperwork on it, they're not signing it. I just want them to have a pass and we'll take it when they leave. And then they showed up.
Wow.
So I went down right in front of the captain's main entrance there. So I went down to the nice big chauffeured limousine, and there were 4 Russians, and there was Dr. Von Beck, and there was a chauffeur. We went up to the captain's office, and Millie handed me the plaque, and I handed it to the captain. Now, I should have put a couple of those pictures in here. And it looks like the captain's been waiting for him. He's all smiles and really,
Oh, this is great.
No. But anyway, that was, we go over to the centrifuge. And the chauffeur was leading the way down to the car, and I was going to follow them all. And Millie looked at me, and I said, what's the matter, Millie? She said, we spelled the word wrong. Development. Oh, we didn't even spell our name right. Oh,
That's great.
I said, Billy, get another plaque
Get it right.
and check it. It would, she couldn't check it and send it back, but we got a picture of it with them. So I said, send it over to the centrifuge. Call the girl over there and say, hold it over there till we come over. And don't have it out in the open. So I had taken the plaque when they went in the car, and we all went over to the centrifuge, and I said, look, we're going to be here in half an hour. You don't want to carry this heavy plaque around. So I said, I'll put it in the office here, and on the way out, I'll be sure that we get our plaque, So
Time for
Bait
the
and switch.
switcheroo. Yeah, switcheroo.
I have a nice picture of us leaving, and by that time we had met the flight surgeon, who happened to be a female, Vicky Vogue, Lieutenant Vicky Vogue. And I thought that would be nice that she would be in the picture and everything, So that's why we have a nice goodbye picture standing in the doorway of the crew systems building, or in the right up of the that they had in the paper. It said, quoted me as saying, I didn't want to create an international incident.
Yeah, well, Millie prevented the international incident, and we do have the pictures. So here's the picture that Bill said that the captain was all smiles, when everybody comes in, to meet. And you can see that the captain's flanked by the two cosmonauts. Von Beck is to the left there, staring at the KGB agent in the brown blazer on the end. And my understanding is the tall gentleman was one of the senior people with the Russian space agency at the time. And then here's the final picture that Bill mentions, the picture that they get with the flight surgeon outside of the centrifuge. And you can see Bill has this look on his face like, oh man, boy, we narrowly avoided that. But it was Millie that saved the day and saved us from World War III. Two other quick stories, and then we can take questions. So another interesting story, not explicitly related to the Naval Air Development Center, but in the greater Southeastern Pennsylvania area. I'm not sure if people know, but there actually is a connection, one of several connections to the Apollo space program in the 1960s. Actually, the Apollo guidance computer was the first production computer to commit to using integrated circuits. It was used to control both the lunar module, which took astronauts down to the surface of the moon, but also the command module as well. That computer was actually developed by the gentleman you see on the left, Eldon Hall. He worked at MIT, and MIT actually selected the use of an integrated circuit that was produced by Fairchild Micrologic. And actually the Apollo program, interestingly, was the largest purchaser of integrated circuits through 1965 with the space program. And at the time they purchased something like, I think, yeah, it's 200,000 units that were $20 to $30 a pop. Actually, even though Fairchild was the company that developed the integrated circuit, they were mostly made by Raytheon and Philco Ford, which was in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. So they, licensed the development of these integrated circuits. And this image, courtesy of the Smithsonian, is one of the assembly lines for these integrated circuits at Philco Ford. And who do we see all working there? A whole bunch of hidden figures, more women working on those integrated circuits to help support the Apollo lunar landing. This is another interesting story I came across recently. I had the opportunity to interview a lady actually who knew many of the hidden figures down at Langley. Her name is Gloria Chisholm. She was married to actually the chief test pilot for NACA, later NASA, out of Langley. But she actually lived next door to a woman by the name of Beulah Jeanette Boots Barger. And you can see the best picture we have right now is a fairly blurry photograph on the left of Beulah in the center there, flanked by the deputy director of Langley on the left, Paul Holloway, and then her husband on the right. And what's interesting about Beulah, Beulah actually was a seamstress, was the only seamstress at the time working at Langley. And when the Project Mercury program started up, she actually sewed the harnesses that were used by the Mercury pilots for centrifuge training in Johnsville. And I have a picture there of Scott Carpenter inside the original gondola of the Johnsville centrifuge undergoing acceleration testing in preparation for his flight. But, another hidden figure, she developed those harnesses that were used by the astronauts. She also helped develop the inflatable flotation skirt for the Mercury capsules when they splashed down. And so she has some other interesting stories of things she did as a seamstress at Langley. So even though she was not explicitly here in Southeastern Pennsylvania, her handiwork certainly was here in Southeastern Pennsylvania. And then finally, this is really just sort of a call for anyone who certainly has any information about other hidden figures that we'd love to be able to profile. I'm definitely, we're definitely all ears. This individual is another woman that worked, was a scientist that worked at the Naval Air Development Center, specifically with the human centrifuge. Her name was Emma Faesenden. Now we know that she was actually a research scientist with NEDC and worked in the centrifuge, received actually an award from the Aerospace Medical Association in 1976, but we really don't have much information on what else she did. But we do have a couple photographs here or there, including one of my favorite photographs that you see in color there, where I love how Emma is like, basically she's pulling off pretending she's a centrifuge technician with those bright red pumps. That was actually a publicity photo that was taken. And she did not actually work on from the technical aspect of operating the centrifuge. She was basically pulled into this photograph only to have an extra body seated there for the purposes of this publicity shot. But we are very interested in trying to learn more about what she actually did when she worked at the centrifuge. Sadly, she is no longer with us as well. But if anyone knows any information, we'd love to hear about it. So to summarize, I thought it'd be fitting to actually have a quote from Margot Schlatterly, who authored the book about hidden figures, the book that profiled the Langley computers, the computer women. And she explains the importance of showcasing women whose work's always been, as she says, present but unknown. Reviewing them and pulling them out of the shadows creates a more complete and nuanced view of history. It's one thing to read something and then see it come to life. So, Bucks County has its own hidden figure stories, and obviously there are many more stories to tell and uncover. But we also would like to thank these scientists and others for their contributions in winning the Cold War and beyond. So with that, I'm going to actually pause for questions. So if there's any in the chat, or if you'd like to just open up the microphones and ask away, happy to address them. But thank you for your attention.
Nothing in the chat yet. So yeah, like Eleanor said, you can either unmute yourself, or if you want to put a question in the chat, I can read it out for you. That was fascinating, Eleanor. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Eleanor, I have a comment and a question.
Yeah, sure.
My comment is I was diagnosed with dystonia 2 years ago. So I get Botox injections every 90 days. I have a destructive nerve damage in my back, and it's been helping immensely. So I guess I owe a great deal of gratitude towards Marie. I forget her last name.
Maria Chianta.
Maria Chianta. I will mention her name to my neurologist when I see him in a couple of weeks.
Oh, fabulous.
And then I guess I have a question. The First Lady Alice Stoll, I guess it is.
Yeah.
She worked on Nomex, but then she talked about working with DuPont. I don't quite understand, why wouldn't the military just go to a contractor like DuPont and say, this is what we need, a fire retardant suit, and why wouldn't they develop it and manufacture it, et cetera? Why did the Navy or the military do it?
Well, my understanding is that DuPont was, they were not the ones that were developing the applications initially, if you will. I mean, the Navy had a specific remit to try to figure out how to improve upon the nylon flight suits. So, they had researchers, they had Alice, they had the thermal lab. So she was specifically tasked with that assignment. And, it was to locate materials that could be eventually woven into cloth and then tested, for this purpose. So, that's my understanding, is that DuPont had the materials. I mean, they were a chemical lab, basically. They were not the ones that were developing like the flight suits and so forth. But that's my understanding, is where that partnership came about. Another interesting little nuance about the story. So one of the things that I had to look up when we put our application in the nomination for inclusion in the National Inventors Hall of Fame is the timing is interesting. It gets a little fuzzy because they actually asked, there was a question in the application about timing and how can you be sure that, Alice, in fact, was the innovator here in terms of developing Nomex. And if you look at like on DuPont's website, they commercialized the use of basically being able to sell the Nomex cloth for commercial applications, actually right after Alice had done her proof of concept work with the HT1 filament and the cloth. And one of the first applications was actually in race car drivers in the mid-1960s. There had been a series of pretty bad fatal accidents and fires from crashes that prompted the racing industry, it's my understanding, to also look into trying to improve on these flights, their racing suits. So that was one of the first commercial applications in like 1967, I believe it was. But that came right after the proof of concept work that Alice had done. It was also amazing to me when I was preparing this talk and did a fair amount of, I was looking on DuPont's site to see, they have a whole site about Nomex, and it's amazing all of the uses that Nomex material has today. It's used like as an insulator for a variety of applications. It's used for, for suits, for firemen's suits. It's used, as I mentioned, astronauts, race car drivers, pilots. So it's really quite remarkable. It's used also, I think, in hospitals, that some of the like bed sheets and things like that are also, I think, in some cases have some Nomex component to them. So it's really become a tremendous contribution to improving life and protecting individuals as well. So pretty incredible story.
Now, did Alice invent Nomex, and if so, did she receive royalties for it?
She did not receive royalties. DuPont itself developed the filament, this high temperature one filament that was very thick and had flame resistant qualities to it. And Alice's lab subsequently acquired this filament and worked with DuPont to have them produce it into a cloth eventually that could be used, for the pilot suits. The primary patent that Alice has is the one that I showed on screen, which was the thermal analysis device that I believe was used also in some of that early proof of concept work with Nomex. But the cloth itself and the patenting of that material, that is owned by DuPont, but it was Alice who identified the filament and then basically I would say operationalized it for use in the pilots' uniforms.
Did she get royalties for the invention?
I don't believe she did. No,
Yeah,
I don't believe she
okay.
did.
Okay, well, thank you. It was a good presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. I think I can probably stop sharing the screen. Oh, there's everybody again. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. Gosh, I see some familiar names here, and which is nice. So thank you. And again, I do see some former folks that were with the Navy or worked at NEDC, and certainly if you have any information on some of these hidden figures or other hidden figures, I certainly would love to profile them. I can tell you another person I debated putting in here, but I decided, all right, we'll make it all women tonight. Another gentleman that I found, this was rather fascinating, was Carl Clark. Carl Clark was actually worked at Cornell, was on faculty with, at the time Alice Stoll was there. And I think he was another one of these guys that James Hardy, who went to work at NADC, recruited down to NADC. He actually became he was the primary director for Project Mercury training with the centrifuge. And he was a rather interesting character as well. Very innovative. He was, I think it was a postdoc or faculty position when he was out at the University of Illinois Champaign. He actually worked with the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta to develop the green Coca-Cola glass, because he was, I think, an expert in colorimetric analysis. His big claim to fame, though, after he left NADC, after Project Mercury, he went to the Glenn L. Martin Company in Baltimore, and actually was working on some airbag technology originally for the space program. Well, that didn't really pan out, but guess what ended up getting used with automobiles? Airbags. So he's given credit for championing the use of airbags. And in fact, one other funny story that he apparently is known for is he was to prove the concept of that these airbags were actually protective, as an automobile protective device. He actually drove his own car into the side of his house to prove that the airbag would deploy and would actually work, much to the chagrin of his wife, of course, who was not too thrilled with that little adventure. But he was another quite a character, another one of these, innovators, and another one of these guys that would try things out on himself. So I thought he was a pretty interesting story as well. So he may make it into a future presentation as well.
Eleanor, we have a question in the chat. Did any of these people ever work on the Manhattan Project?
Oh, well, I do have a related story about that. Another guy I'd love to tell some more stories about. I am not aware that anyone at NADC explicitly worked on the Manhattan Project. There may have been, I don't know, but I don't believe so. What I can tell you, though, particularly to look at exposure of like aircraft equipment to certain types of radiation, to basically, the concern is, in the event of a nuclear detonation, if there's an aircraft flying through, the radiation cloud, would the instrumentation go haywire or stop functioning? So there was work at NADC to look at radiation hardening, essentially, of this aircraft equipment and other types of instrumentation. Interestingly, we had interviewed a gentleman who was a machinist at the base. His name was Charlie Fay. And Charlie, he had a very interesting story, but he not only did he was out actually and witnessed some of the nuclear testing that went on out in Las Vegas. In fact, he told us a story about being out there during a nuclear detonation. He was inside a house, and he said the blast was so strong, it actually shook paint off the walls in the interior of the house. But he survived. He passed away in his mid-90s, so he didn't die of radiation exposure. But when he came to work in NADC, he was actually ended up connecting with another guy who was a researcher, turned out doing this work on testing of different equipment and exposure to radiation. This guy they had built actually a tunnel that was underneath Jacksonville Road. It was basically dug out underneath Jacksonville Road from one of the, I think it was building 2, one of the long buildings that are still along Jacksonville Road. And it was actually underneath Jacksonville Road where they would do these experiments. So my understanding is that tunnel is probably still there. I'd love to see it someday, but yeah, they did quite a number of experiments under there. I have a whole series of photographs of this work that apparently was classified at the time. And the funny story is, so here's old Charlie telling us all these stories when we interviewed him, and we're like, these pictures, were saying that they were classified. How did you get these pictures? And he's like, oh, well, what happened was when I retired, I had a couple of my buddies, help clean out my office. So they basically shoved everything into my station wagon. And when I got home, I realized I had all this stuff and I just never returned it. So now we have these photographs that we have on file. So that's at least the one story I can tell you about radiation, but not the Manhattan Project explicitly. Oh, but there is one other pseudo connection to that. The radioisotopes that were used for these experiments that were done at NEDC, our understanding is those were actually acquired from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which I believe there was a connection, whether direct or indirect, with the Manhattan Project, but there was work going on with those radioisotope production down in Oak Ridge. Any other questions? All right, thanks for the thumbs up there.